Good. I can hear the bells, not the whistles, but I guess it's time to get started. So, first of all, welcome to everyone who's tuned in. We have a group of MIT club members, we have alumni, and we have friends, students, and associates who are linked to us, to this first online event, which we've piloted for the very first time this year. I guess, unfortunately, because of Corona, as you all pretty well know, it's been very disruptive to us. So we've been looking at finding a way of reconnecting to everyone and reconnecting in a meaningful way with a topic that is of interest. So we've created an event series, and this event series is called Climate Change Matters, in search of environmental solutions for a better world. As Corona is hopefully passing by at some point, as elections in America will be passing by at some point, we are very convinced that one topic will stay relevant and will probably come back into the focus. And the focus will be climate and what we can do about it. So today is our first event, which is called Climate Awareness Matters. And this Climate Awareness Matters, learn, understand, act. And the focus this time will be on what we can do to sharpen our awareness before we can find solutions. And we are very lucky that today we have three highly distinguished panelists. We have one speaker on the panel who's going to be joining us in addition, and we are very lucky to have a moderator who is most accomplished. And it is a great pleasure that we will be able to listen to the thoughts and experiences of Dr. Antje Danielsen. We will be hearing Peter Senge and Ovais Samad, who has a pre-recorded message to all of us. And later in the discussions, in the panel discussions, his position will be discussed by Fleur Newman, who will be able to answer questions as well. And very importantly, we have Dr. Philipp Gerbert, who will be taking us through today's event. Dr. Gerbert is a director of applied AI at Unternehmertum. He's also a senior partner emeritus of the Boston Consulting Group and has been spending many years of his life in consulting, amongst others with McKinsey, but also A.T. Kearney. He is also focusing his attention and his experience on climate action, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing. Philip is an expert on energy technology and has worked extensively on climate impact. He co-founded BCG's, Boston Consulting Group's, Center for Climate Action and has led the collaboration with German Industry Association. He was also the co-author of related international reports, one of which was A New Balance of Power, or The Economic Case of Combating Climate Change. So beyond energy, Philipp is a director of Applied AI, a non-for-profit initiative of Unternehmertum. He has led BCG's strategic collaboration with MIT Sloan, and he himself has spent many years at MIT, where he gained a PhD in physics. So he is going to be our host today. And before I hand over to him, I would like to extend a very warm thank you to Peter Clement, Sloan Fellow of 2009, who has been instrumental in putting this event together, helping us address everyone, helping us win people's time and dedication to share their views with the whole community. And it is, of course, a pleasure from the whole board to welcome you to today's event, and we hope that we can invite you and tempt you for upcoming events, which will probably happen once a quarter in this format. So this is, again, our guinea pig. We hope everything works out, no glitches, and that we will have an interesting discussion. Without further ado, I'm honored and I'm very happy to hand over to Philipp. And Philipp, if you would be so kind to take us through the rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Wolfgang, it's a privilege. Thank you very much to everybody. So I will in a second introduce the three speakers of today. Just so you know, we will have three, presentations, and after the presentations, we'll have a discussion. I'll put in a few questions on the panel, but you are also welcome to join the discussion. All of you should have found the chat function by now. If you have any technical problems, write in the chat. If you have any questions that you would like us to pick up, please also write in the chat. We will monitor it throughout the discussion and pick it up later. And at the end, just so you know, Helmut Lotze, the president of the MIT Club Germany, will give a few remarks on how this program proceeds going forward. So without further ado, I would like panelists. I want to start with Antje Danielson, who is going to also kick off our presentations today. Antje is Director of Education of the MIT Energy Initiative since 2016, and previously directed the Tufts Institute of the Environment and was Professor for Public Health there. Her core interests are in energy education and carbon capture and storage, and she has had so many positions in the ward that it's hard to, to recapture all of them on national councils, universities, all around the three topics: energy, environment in general, and education. As a fun fact, she also co-founded Zipcar during the internet boom in 1999. And by background, she has a PhD in geochemistry, actually here from the Free University of Berlin. We'll talk to us about education around energy and climate change, and in particular also innovation and education. The second person I would like to also present here is Peter Singi. Peter Singi is a founding chair of the Society of Organizational Learning and co-founder of the Academy for Systemic Change, and of course a senior lecturer at MIT Sloan School of Management. I assume most of you know Peter. To me, he will always be the author of The Fifth Discipline. Also, he can't probably hear it anymore, but it was such a pioneering work on organizational learning and systemic change, and in particular, strongly attacking many myths in management lore and, putting out a new paradigm. We're particularly happy to have him here because he started already in his campaign sustainability and what we need to do in the leadership with the necessary revolution in 2008, and this his systemic, I think, address of to the problems is what we really will need in this kind of environment. And then we'll have, as mentioned, a short video message by Owais Samad. Owais is the Deputy Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UN-FCCC, since 2017. Previously, he spent 27 years at the International Office of Migration in Geneva, and was actually instrumental in bringing this Office of Migration within the United Nations system. He will address, questions in and around, where do we stand in Paris Agreement, climate change, but also what it means in the current environment of COVID and many other challenges that we see in and around the world. Live then will join us Fleur Newman, who serves at the UN-FCCC since 2011, most recently as the leader of the unit for AC, gender and youth in energy, sustainability, and also very adamantly in gender issues. Fleur has previously already had a distinguished career as a lawyer, focusing in energy and environmental topics, and building on her degrees in sustainable development from Murdoch University, later in law from Notre Dame University, and adding a certificate in environmental law, all in Australia, but not done there, later complemented by a master in law from the London School of Economics. So certainly, if you ever have any questions on environment or law, Fleur is a person to turn to. Very good. So these will be our panels. Again, we'll start with some presentations and or speeches addressing you, framing the subject, and then proceed to the panel discussion and hope for your vivid participation. Antje, I would now like to hand over to you. I think you also wanted to present a few charts, so perhaps you can take over the control.
Thank you very much. as said before, I'm actually German, and if we wouldn't have COVID, I would probably address you in Germany right now. I usually spend my summers in Germany, but this year I actually debunked to Maine, and you can see I'm in a cottage in Maine, and the weather here is rather cold. That's why I put a scarf on. Let me start sharing my slides with you. So the Energy Initiative was founded about 12 years ago by then MIT President Susan Hockfield and by Ernie Moniz, who was President Obama's Secretary of Energy. And it's intended to be the hub, the energy hub of MIT. We have a rather special position in the structure of MIT. We're not in any of the departments of schools. We report directly to the Vice President of Research. And our mission is to work with everyone in MIT. We facilitate multidisciplinary collaborations. So about 30% of the faculty members at MIT are affiliated with MIT in one way or another. Our funding comes mostly through strategic partnerships with the industry, and so far we have brought in over $750 million to go into the various research areas. Our focus really is on low carbon energy pathways. And that has become even stronger after the 2015 MIT Climate Change Action Plan, in which it was stipulated that the Energy Initiative would start 8 low carbon energy research centers. We have started to do that. About half of them are on their way, very well funded, and we're still working on the other half. We are also creating an ecosystem related to energy and climate change, and that ecosystem consists of research, as you can see in the graph. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but here is the research, here is education, and then finally we also do outreach. And our goal is to transform the world's energy systems. We do this through enabling innovation and across the whole energy value chain. So let's just illuminating a little bit what the actual challenge is. The actual challenge is, I call it the triple challenge actually, to provide ample energy to a growing world population while decarbonizing the energy system, and all of that in a critical time frame. Let's start a little bit with illuminating the background and talk a little bit about providing ample energy to a growing world population. So you might all have seen this graph. It's population growth between 1820 and 2016. We're currently at a world population of just over 7 billion. We are projected to have about over 9 billion in 2050 and over 11 billion by the end of the century. Most of this growth is in regions of the world that still have the potential for growth and development. And why is this important? This is one of my favorite graphs. I love this graph. It was developed by Kate Raworth, and she has written a book that's called Donut Economics, was published in 2017. The core of this graph really is in the middle, the green thing, that's the donut. And it basically says that if the world population is above a social foundation, but below an ecological ceiling, we are in a safe and just space for humanity. That's what she calls a safe, just space for humanity. And of course, that includes creating our social constructs such that we are in the safe, just space. And what are those? Those are social equity, peace, education, just to name a few. Food, water, energy. Energy is one of them. And then out here and inside, what you see is she took this from a graph that was published by Johan Rockström and a whole lot of colleagues in a a seminal science paper a few years ago. What those authors say is that humans are impacting the Earth's systems that sustain life on Earth. And those systems are air, climate, the oceans, our freshwater system, land, and that our activities have already impacted some of these systems to a degree where they actually fall out of the ecological ceiling. So by putting these two graphs together, Kate really showed what the impact here is of human activities. And I'm showing this graph because the population growth on the planet really puts us in danger of going out of the ecological ceiling very easily because of course, in those countries where development is not as far developed as here in the United States or in Germany, there is huge scope for increasing the standard of living, which usually goes hand in hand with energy consumption. I just want to show this graph very quickly. It shows the Human Development Index on the left here on the y-axis and electricity consumption. You can see that there is really it's really an asymptotic and that is clearly very hard to reach 100% of the Human Development Index, but also that most countries really have not reached even above 80%. The criteria that they use to calculate the Human Development Index are health, education, and standard of living. So most countries have not reached that. I just wanted to make sure we all understand how much capacity there is still for growth. And then this is a rather depressing graph as well, because it shows access to electricity in specific areas. And what we can see here is that over 50% of the population of sub-Saharan Africa still doesn't have access to electricity. India is a little better, but still there's over 15% of the population doesn't have access to electricity. So providing the energy to a growing world population is a real problem, which leads us straight to the Global Development Goals. Of the 17 Global Development Goals, only number 7 here is really directly, specifically related to affordable and clean energy. But if you look at the targets that are contained in the Sustainable Development Goals, I'm sorry, that's my voice. Of those targets, 65% of the targets require an action on energy. So really underpinning the Sustainable Development Goals is the growth of energy consumption across the world. So now let's quickly jump to the decarbonization, the second big challenge in this triple challenge. Here we see a growth in energy consumption. This is a projection out to 2015. And again, you can see that most of the growth is in Asia and in other countries that still have development potential. And why is this a problem? Well, it's a problem because our current energy system is composed of mostly fossil fuels. If you look at this graph from 2018, you can see that the global energy resources come mostly from coal, crude oil, and natural gas. Traditional biofuels and renewable and alternative energy sources are really rather small, have a small contribution. And this really, I think, exemplifies the magnitude of the challenge. Because we not only have to transform the system that is already in place currently, but we also have to transform and hopefully leapfrog all the energy sources that are projected to grow outwards from here to 2050. Here's just a very quick graph that shows the CO2 emissions. Am I still on? I assume I'm still on. So this graph shows the CO2 emissions from these sources. Coal is currently still globally the largest, or then followed by oil and gas. Now, the last part is in a critical time frame. A lot of people say that 2030 might be a pivotal moment where the climate system will go from linear responses to potentially nonlinear responses and chaos, and we will not be able to actually figure out all the feedback systems then. So we basically have between now and 2030, if we set that as a target date, to figure this out. And at the magnitude of the problem, this time frame is just daunting. So where I'm going with this is that we have to accelerate. We have to accelerate the energy transition. And when we think about what goes into acceleration, those are just some components that some colleagues and I recently put together. So up here in pink, I basically put what the core expertise of MIT is. And Peter will go into a little bit more into what the roles of these institutions are. But when I think about this, MIT is doing technology innovation, and then on the education side, knowledge and skills and courage. I think courage is actually really important. If we also want to accelerate the energy transition, there has to be intention. We have to set a culture, not just a corporate culture, but the corporate culture is important. We have to have a regulatory framework, and then, of course, most businesses consider their bottom line and what are the business opportunities. All right, so when we think about that in the context of the MIT Energy Initiative, we have to ask ourselves, what can we contribute to this? And the first thing, of course, is research. And I mentioned all the money that has gone into research over the last 12 years. One pivotal part, and this is a very busy slide, I understand that. I will very briefly walk you over this. And the reason why I'm showing this is it's because I believe this is a very important piece of work that we're doing right now. This is basically a flow chart of a computer program that we're developing. We're almost done. That takes a systemic systems approach to life cycle analysis. But most life cycle analysis is expressed in financial terms, like what does it cost us? This one is expressed in greenhouse gas emissions. And the specific thing here is you can pick a technology that you want to test. Let's just say electric cars. And you can say, okay, are electric cars better than cars run by biofuel, for example? So you can go through that entire pathway from the production of the resources that go into an electric car all the way to the end use. And we have the data and the algorithms in the software that do that. So let's say an electric car, you have the minerals and the elements that go into the batteries, for example. You have the energy. You can choose, did the energy come from solar? Did the energy come from geothermal? And that is usually based on your geography and your infrastructure. Then you go to the midstream and you go, well, how were these resources transported to the manufacturing facilities? Then you go to the process, to the manufacturing. You can ask, was carbon capture and sequestration and storage involved in this? Then you can say, what is the gate to the end user? How are these cars sold? You know, what kind of energy is used in let's say the dealerships or something like this. And then the last part is, how does the end user actually use this product? So you can compare very easily the carbon mitigation properties of a technology that you choose. So our researchers have gone through this, and they have found that the carbon emissions for electric cars, for example, vary from state to state in the United States. In some of the states, it is very beneficial to have electric cars. In other states, it's not that good, actually, and other technologies are better. Just to illustrate a little bit, this is unfortunately a graph from 2016. We're in the process, actually, of revamping this, but we have so many research projects that it's not that easy to do that, but it shows you where the money has flown, where the research money has flown. So let's look at this, for example. 31% of our research funding prior to 2016 has gone into looking at decreasing carbon emissions from hydrocarbon products and processing. 6% has gone into nuclear. That has increased dramatically because we have a very large research project right now on nuclear fusion. And it's actually quite tantalizing and exciting because a large amount of money is currently flowing into our nuclear fusion low carbon energy research center. So that that slice of the pie will become much bigger in the new graph. Up here, you can see specific technologies that have been funded by us, and by how much. So 38% has gone into solar. All right, so what I'm really here to talk about is actually the education part, and how me as a director of education, I'm very passionate about this. And I started at MIT 4 years ago, and the first question that I asked myself is, what do we need to do to accelerate the energy transition through education? Well, that's not that easy, actually. It turns out that the academy in general, because of its administrative structure and the mindset of how we run education, is a rather inflexible and immovable object. So in order to produce educational programs that are that reach a lot of people and that bring in the right skills, you really have to be very interdisciplinary. You have to reach a lot of people. So I've spent the last 4 years trying to design a program, an education program in the Energy Initiative that accounts for those things. Of course, this is MIT. MIT's motto is Mens et Manus. So there are the three things that we want to do. We want to understand the problem. We want to identify the pressure points and ripple effects and integrate and solve the problem. Very briefly, because I don't have that much more time, I inherited 4 years ago a very solid undergrad program that has an energy studies minor and research opportunity and internships for students. I also inherited a PhD and postdoc program, that's the Energy Fellows. But what I've been primarily working on is the master's level education. And we have spent a great deal of time over the last 3 years to develop online courses. And these online courses will be bundled at what we call a MicroMasters through the platform edX. And this MicroMasters will allow students from all around the world to learn what they can learn from MIT and apply that hopefully to changing the energy systems in their own countries. I'm sorry, I'm going backwards here. Here's the thing that we have mostly focused on. Just to give you a taste for that, 40% of the annual world, we started with a course on buildings. 40% of the annual world carbon emissions come from buildings, so we thought that was very important. And there's a really immediate need to mainstream climate action because buildings last for a long time, 100 years sometimes. And it's based on the Low Carbon Energy Center's findings. Why go online? Because we reach a lot of people, and the program that we are developing is rather cheap. Maybe not for some people in the developing countries, but our goal is to work with foundations to sponsor the tuition for students in developing countries. Here are some statistics from our second course run, actually. 71% of students said that they took the course for professional academic growth. These are the countries where the students came from. And we had, in the second course, we had 14,000 students enrolled. We had 3 course runs so far, and currently we have over 30,000 students who have taken our courses. And just to show you, we're also reaching, hopefully, the right age. I would like it to be a little younger, but the age distribution is centered around the mid-20s, which is just the right age for students to learn about this. And some of the testimonials here, I won't go into this because I'm already over my time, but we get extremely good feedback. And I think this just shows that online education really reaches the world population and brings specific skills and knowledge that we provide at MIT to the world, hopefully. This is just for our future research, and I think I leave you with this final graph showing that what we're building, this energy education ecosystem which is virtually integrated with undergrads, PhD students, and then master students, will lead to an energy transition workforce and build capacity for the world to change. Okay, and with that, I think I hand it over to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Antje, for this wonderful overview of the MIT Energy Initiative, both on the content they're addressing and what they do in their programs. But before we enter the discussion, I would like to, then hand over to Peter to give us a view on, what's systemic, how to get to systemic action.
Peter. Simple question. Should the answer also be so simple? So first off, really appreciate being included in this, partly because this is the irony of course, our world today. This is the first time I've heard Anji present, and there's so much connection. And we were joking before we started when we were all just chatting in the hour prior to getting this webinar opened up, that we have to meet online via Germany, even though we live probably 50 miles or less from each other. Anyhow, however it works, but I really appreciate what she was sharing. I'm going to back up a step or two and mainly use this time to kind of frame some very general perspectives. What does it mean to think systemically about climate change? And then when we get back to the conversation altogether later, then we can kind of look at connections between these remarks and what Anji just offered and what will come following. So my life has been dedicated to this question of what does it mean, practically speaking, to think more systemically, act more systemically, feel, sense, and be more aware systemically. Climate change is kind of archetypal in terms of presenting us with the kind of what I would say a core dilemma of the modern age. We understand climate change primarily through our understanding of the physical sciences, the natural sciences. In the years ago, and when we started working in this broad area, we said, hey, climate change is really a gift. It gives us something very tangible that we can understand, all of the kind of manifest symptoms through our natural sciences. It gives us a kind of time clock. We know we need to change. But with climate change, we can say, it's not a gradual change over the next 2 centuries. I mean, it's taken a couple of centuries to get us into this predicament, but we actually don't have a couple centuries to get out of this predicament. And so we can kind of calibrate not only the qualitative, but a little bit of the quantitative changes. We can track emissions. We can track concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So it's a very interesting kind of gift in this sense. The problem is, it's really the tip of the iceberg. Climate change is a symptom. It's not the core problem. The core problem is we do not know how to live on this planet at the scale in which we're living, both the population and the economic footprint combined. We are fundamentally out of balance. One of the oldest ideas in human civilizations is the notion that societies live well or poorly depending on harmony or balance. We are not, standing aside from the natural world. We are simply nothing more or less than an expression of the natural world. And species come and go, and we haven't been around that long. And the irony of all the movements to save the planet is that the planet's actually not in danger. We and quite a few other species are. So it's really about save the humans, not save the planet. And we all know that. But the very fact that we slip so casually into that kind of language illustrates a very deep problem. And I'll just point to the problem as human centrism. We actually think it all revolves around us. At the cultural level, at an intellectual level, at some level, we know that's not true. We know we're part of larger ecological systems, yet we act culturally as if that's not the case, as if it really is all about us. And I was very struck recently by just a felt experience of this during the vice presidential debates, and I noticed how effectively the Mike Pence, the vice presidential candidate, standing vice president, could make the argument against his opponent that, you really want to get rid of all fossil fuels. And the interesting thing about the statement, and I think the effect it had even on me, I'm kind of like intellectually deeply into these things for a long time, yet I could feel, wow, that's really radical. Isn't that interesting? He could use a statement like that to kind of paint her into a corner of radicalism. Now, obviously, this is a political statement or a statement about the political reality of the United States. But I'm just using it to illustrate. And of course, that political reality would be quite different in different places in the world. But I'm trying to use this to illustrate. Here's, to me, one way to frame our core problem here. We have gotten into this predicament through the mastery of the natural world through our technology based on our understanding of the, quote, natural or physical sciences particularly. Yet we're not going to solve the problem solely through that sort of understanding. This is a profoundly human problem. It's a social problem. It's a cultural problem. It's not a physical science problem. So while the lens we have to most rigorously understand climate change is a natural science lens, greenhouse gases accumulated in the environment, the various cycles, nitrogen and phosphorus and obviously carbon in the environment, the wherewithal to actually come up with solutions probably will not come solely from the natural sciences. That's our predicament. So you might say our domain of sophistication is inadequate to the nature of the problem we wrestle with. We will have to develop sophistication in the human and social domain comparable to our sophistication in the natural sciences or physical sciences domain. It's a huge task. And as Antje was illustrating, we actually don't have a lot of time. So I'm going to just say a few more words about how we've come to think about that. Obviously, my comments at this point are very, very broad. I'm just going to introduce the core epistemology as we've come to understand it, the ways of making sense of the world that we've used for years now to introduce people. What do we mean by systems thinking? The word system is a kind of a crummy word. It's often used as synonymous with computers and computer systems. But a family or the family is our core system. We all grow up understanding interdependence at the social level through our lives and families, friendships, relationships, and then obviously through our interdependence with the natural world, which is profoundly systemic. I'm looking out my window at the forest across the street. Who's in charge of that forest? The obvious question is no one, because living systems are in charge of themselves. They kind of self-moderate, self-control, and evolve. The trees that I'm looking at right now will be gone. Many of them will be around well after me, but they won't be here forever. But new trees will come along. The most common definition of a living system in biology, or at least the most widespread one, is called autopoiesis. A living system is self-creating. Machines, by contrast, are allopoietic, created by another. So this kind of grounding is really essential. What do we mean by systems? So I'm just going to introduce you to this simple epistemological framework. Think of an iceberg. At the top of that iceberg is what we call the events. So whatever is the last publication of the IPCC becomes an event. Whatever is the most current announcement of the current concentration of greenhouse gases in the environment is an event. Okay? Whatever is the most recent catastrophic climate event, the fires in California, tsunamis, hurricanes, typhoons, those are events. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, events are part of life. The problem is if we obsessively focus on only the events, we have very low leverage to change things. The best we can ever do at that event level is react. And we seek to react effectively. Okay, we seek to get the right kind of aid to the people who have suffered the hurricane or the typhoon. We seek to get the right kind of support and assistance to the people whose houses may burn. But you can see, obviously, that reactive stance is very, very limited in terms of doing anything about the problems. The next level of the iceberg we always call the patterns. You can think of that as the trends. Obviously, you can track, greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. You can track the frequency of different types of climate events, and then you start to see trends. And you realize, well, wait a second, if we're only reacting to this event, and we're totally missing, you might say, the historical context, how it's developed over time, that sooner or later it's extremely likely, or more and more likely, that there will be severe fires. So that's what we often call the pattern level. It sits kind of below the surface, hence the iceberg metaphor. What's on top of the surface is the event. You can kind of see these patterns, but it takes scientific analysis, it takes organizing data, it takes looking at often long time spans, much longer than we are used to looking at. So it's kind of accessible. It's certainly tangible in one sense. You construct all sorts of indices like frequency of extreme climate events. The insurance industry, property and liability insurance industry globally has been doing this for a long, long time. And that's why actually there's been interesting leadership efforts repeatedly going back to the 1990s coming out of the property and liability insurance industry because they track the frequency of severe climate events which impact their business and the viability of their business. I mean, there are many parts of the United States you simply cannot buy insurance at a reasonable price today because the risk is too high. The real question that I think we all would probably pretty quickly agree is the right question is, okay, how do these patterns arise? Where do they come from? And really, what can we do about them? When you start asking questions like that, you're moving down even much deeper in the iceberg, way below the surface, into what we all have long called the underlying structure or the systemic structure. There's two kind of constitutive elements of systemic structure. The artifacts, our energy system, what we measure, what we don't measure, all the more tangible aspects of the, quote, system, so to speak, how our houses are built, how our transportation system is designed. Those are all the manifest aspects of the underlying system, but they only exist because they're entwined and often a consequence of the intangible, what we call the mental models. What makes a social system as opposed to a physical system is it has no meaning independent of the mindsets, assumptions, and habitual ways of thinking and acting that constitute what we call the mental models. So social systems are social in the sense that they're created by human beings. While we have obviously built extensively on our understanding of natural and physical sciences, our energy system is not based on the natural sciences. It's not based on the laws of physics. It can't violate the laws of physics, but it doesn't arise from that. The notion that energy should be free, I'll speak now as an American. I think the deep mental model that gradually took root in this country over the last century, maybe 150 years, it's a gradual process, obviously, is that energy is free. And here's what I mean by free. It's not that we don't pay anything. It's that we rarely think about the cost of energy in making key decisions. I've spent a lot of time working in the business world. I guarantee you, very few key decisions are made by businesses, by the vast majority of businesses, where the cost of energy between option A and option B factors into that decision. So de facto, it's free. It's a non-issue. The same is true for me as an individual. While I might want to have my solar panels on the roof, and I might like driving a car that either takes no fossil fuels or uses fossil fuels very, very efficiently, the truth of the matter is they're actually symbolic gestures that have more meaning to me symbolically than they do economically. So I'm trying to illustrate something now. You have the social systems you have because there's a world of artifacts, the nature of the cars, the nature of the transportation system, where the energy comes from, the centralization or decentralization of electricity production, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The tangible parts, because they're embedded in a mental reality, an inner reality of shared assumptions, expectations, norms, ways of living. So that's what we call the underlying structure. Okay, so there's the end of my lecture on systems. So the simplest way to begin thinking about systems thinking is, well, how do we move from the events, which we can't ignore, I'm not saying we should ignore them, to seeing the deeper, longer term patterns, to really thinking deeply about the underlying structures. And the reason for that is very simple. Nothing will change. Nothing will change systemically without shifts in underlying structures. And here's where the social sciences, I'll say it in the broadest sense, are so important. Because in social systems, underlying structures include the tangible or the artifactual and the mental or the interior or the assumptions. The social sciences sit right in the heart of any really practical thing that can be done about this. So let me just finish by making a few comments that maybe we can come back to in the conversation a little later. I think one implication of all this, so this whole session is meant to focus as much as we can on solutions. And the reason I took the time I just did is to kind of frame a way to think about solutions. One way to do that is to think of the kind of institutional ecosystems we deal with. And I would like to suggest that we can think of government, business, and education as three kind of core institutions along a time horizon. In thinking about solutions more systemically, one principle that you encounter again and again and again, you must think across multiple time horizons. You cannot ignore the events. If you ignore the events, you lose credibility. Obviously, there's all kinds of moral and ethical issues at the event level. You cannot ignore the events. But if you only focus on the events, you've ignored you might say, your responsibilities as a leader. So you've got the short term and you've got this long term. In between, you've got an intermediate term. So if you think of short term, intermediate term, long term, and then you think, now, if we laid out our primary institutions along that kind of continuum, where would we situate them? Obviously, in a lot of ways, most governmental institutions, certainly the visible public ones like our national governmental institutions, tend to be very locked into the short term because they operate on political cycles. They're very much expected to react effectively to crises. I mean, that's one of the reasons we need government. So they tend to be very much at that end of the continuum. Occasionally, there might be some very thoughtful legislation or regulations that are trying to influence things over the next few decades. But those are the exceptions to the rule. Business, on the other hand, is a very, in my experience, kind of paradoxical institution. Because on the one hand, we all know it tends to be very anchored in the short term. You know, it's what was your profit last quarter? And you have those quarterly briefings with the analysts if you're a private business. And they hold CEOs around the world with all their power in a state of terror because a bunch of 35-year-old analysts could kind of mark down the economic attractiveness of your enterprise. Okay, so we know there's an anchor, you might say. On the other hand, most good businesses really want to be around for at least another 20, 30, 40, 50 years. If you ask, what's your mission? What's your purpose? If you really feel you're doing something that's of genuine value to the world, not just making money, you don't want it to end. And you don't want it certainly to end in the next 2 or 3 years. So business has this opportunity, in my experience, to span a much broader spectrum or portion of that time continuum. I've had an opportunity to do a lot of work in global food systems, and I've watched businesses like Unilever, who I know quite well, and many, many others kind of step forward and say, wait a second, the overall arc of our global food systems is a disaster. We destroy ecological capital, we destroy social capital in order to produce short-term financial capital. Food depends on nature, period. We're nowhere near living on artificial food. And I'm not even sure what that would mean practically. We eat the earth in multiple forms. So the health and well-being of the ecological systems underlying food is crucial, as is the health and well-being of farming communities. There's been quite a fascinating movement in the world of business, in the food industry, to start to think about the health and well-being of the value chain as a whole, right back to the farmers and the ecological conditions of those farmers. But the institution at the longest end that has most of those, think of it as kind of temporal center of gravity of different institutions. The one that's most situated in the long term, of course, is education. It's the only one of our primary institutions that has a 50 to 75-year time horizon, the lifetime of our students. And if you think that way, you don't only think of university education, you must think of primary and secondary education. Many years ago, with one last comment to illustrate this, I was doing a session with Dalai Lama out in Vancouver, and he said something that was so striking. He said, in the 20th century, 200 million people died from warfare. Clearly, there's something wrong with our system of education. It was such a striking statement. But then you realized wars are not created by uneducated people, by and large. Climate change is not created by uneducated people. The harvesting of social and natural capital to produce financial capital is definitely not created by uneducated people. The way our world works today is primarily shaped by people who are the product of our education system. So you could say in many ways, nothing will ever change without getting at those deeper institutional roots of individualism, of materialism, of excessive personal competition. Keep in mind, as a school child, collaboration is called cheating. And yet, in the world of work, we know teams are everything. So in so many ways, our educational system that we have today, I'm pretty now pointing at primary and secondary, which is by far, to me, the most important part of our education system, is anchored in the world of 200 years ago. And we all know the industrial age education system has been exported around the world to the point that you can go into a school in Shanghai or anywhere in India or even in Africa to some degree. And it doesn't look much different than a school in Philadelphia or Mannheim. It's the Western education system that has been exported around the world. They even use the same books. They just translate them into Chinese. So if you think of this whole continuum of institutions, you have to have strategies that span the continuum. You have to take them all into account, just as you have to take into account the short term, medium term, and long term. So that's kind of what it means to think systemically about this. Particulars of some of those implications, I'm happy to get into as we get into the conversation, but this is probably a good point to end my remarks.
Thank you very much, Peter, for this, let's say, systemic overview of and system kind of aspect of this whole question. We'll get back to you from complexifying to simplifying to actually get to some actions in the last part. Perhaps I think now we get the video from Owais. Are you ready to launch that? Okay, so getting it from the Deputy Secretary of the UN-FCCC, he wanted to address us, so let's listen to that and then go into the discussion.
Dear participants and dear panelists, it's a great pleasure for me to be contributing to this session on climate awareness and learning on behalf of United Nations climate change. I'm particularly pleased to see the cross-disciplinary, action-oriented approach that the famous MIT has been taking, and very much appreciate the focus on systemic change of the MIT Sloan School. We need public awareness and understanding for the interconnectedness of various issues, as I will explain later. And I'm convinced that such an understanding will enable the kind of transformational change that we all need. Again, more on that later. Tackling climate change requires all sectors to be involved, and educational institutions have a moral responsibility to unpack climate change through education. Our international agreements on climate change recognize the core role of climate change education, training, public awareness, participation, and access to information. More specifically, those international agreements that we are the custodians of, in particular Article 6 of the convention that formed our organization UN-FCCC back in 1992, supported by another stream of work that was concluded in Doha during a conference meeting in 2012, and finally, and actually more importantly, in Article 12 of the Paris Agreement in 2015. These are multilateral global international agreements that emphasize action for climate empowerment. Now, what does that mean? It basically means education, training, public awareness, participation, and access to information and international cooperation on these issues. These 6 elements embedded in those agreements that I just mentioned are foundational for the success of our work in tackling the climate crisis. Only if the public, every citizen, has access to information and learning opportunities on climate change, we will be able to turn the tide. Only if public understands the connections between the way we live, the way we work, the way we produce and consume, the way we cope with changing weather and rain patterns, heat in cities, drought and storms, and in turn the impact climate change has on our health, our livelihoods, the health of our children, the food we eat. Only if we all understand how it is all interrelated and interconnected do we have the kind of climate democracy that we need to all together ensure a safe present and future of our planet. This understanding is needed to accelerate the transformation that we need, as agreed by almost all countries of the world in December 2015 with the Paris Agreement, and closely interlinked to the 2030 Development Agenda, the SDGs as they are known. We have seen in the recent past how youth have taken to streets to demand stronger and more decisive climate action from governments. This movement is based on living the experience of climate change closely every day and understanding, as I said above, that human activities are causing the climate change and the crisis we are all experiencing. I would like to encourage you all, no matter your age, your professional background, to learn about climate change and the solutions that are within our grasp, discuss and share what you learned with friends, colleagues, families, leveraging the power of social media, and inspire through your stories of what you did and what you did differently, actually, after learning about climate change and climate action. We need everyone, no matter your age or gender, no matter where you live, to join us in this cause, to share the learning, to observe and learn continuously, and to become drivers of that transformational change that we need. And as we all saw in the recent past 6 months, the unfortunate evolution of the pandemic that we are living through, the COVID-19, has added a completely new and unprecedented challenge to our lives, threatening our health and putting livelihoods at stake. But the climate emergency has not been interrupted. The concentration of greenhouse gases in the Earth's atmosphere keeps rising. Despite lockdowns, we keep contributing to the extinction of animals and plants at an unprecedented rate. And we have seen the many dangerous impacts of climate change, including new records of heat and fires around the world, even as we speak today. Our work has not stopped. We must continue to do our utmost to address climate change. Until we may gather again in person, I hope that will be very soon, let us use the books to learn. Let us use our phones and computers to join online classes and webinars and connect with others around the world to advance our understanding of the challenges and find solutions, and the courage to address climate emergency and create low-carbon, just, climate-resilient economies and societies. You will find a lot of that information and resources on our website of UNFCCC.int, and I welcome all of you to contribute and to join the movement that we are all part of. Thank you very much, and I wish MIT all the very best.
Very good. Thank you very much. So that would allow us now to enter the panel discussion. Could I ask all panelists, let's say, back on virtual stage? And perhaps, I would actually like to start with Fleur. So you just saw, the Deputy Secretary of UN-FCCC comment on, what's happening right now. Any particular perspective you would like to add? In particular, we are obviously always eager to say, okay, what actions are actually most critical in your point of view, to move things forward?
Thank you. And thank you very much also to Peter and Jay, because that was a great introduction and covered a lot of things that we've been dealing with in the work we've been doing this year. I think one of the key things about 2020 for us is that under the Paris Agreement, countries are supposed to be updating their nationally determined contributions, so their national climate plans are due to be updated this year. And so this is an opportunity for governments to be thinking about how to increase ambition and increase the mitigation actions that they're taking to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It is happening, obviously, in the midst of COVID-19. So that then is also, there is a temptation perhaps to think that we can stop for a moment to only be dealing with one crisis at a time. But in fact, as Oves mentioned, the emissions are still going up. And so then it's a question of looking at, in a systems way, looking at how we recover and move forward in response to COVID-19. So there's a need now to also be applying a climate lens to the recovery packages that governments are going to have to be putting in place. We can't be doing these things in isolation or in silos, and that there's clearly a need for us to be, as Peter said, we can't ignore the events that are happening now, but we can also not ignore the fact that our responses now will lock us in to infrastructure, to issues around. So when you're talking about stimulus packages that may be looking at energy or transport or other areas, these are have long-term consequences of the decisions that are being made right now. So I guess that's one aspect of it. I would say that what Ovais mentioned was the Article 6 of the Convention and Article 12 of the Paris Agreement, which is what is now referred to as Action for Climate Empowerment, but deals with education, training, and the public awareness, access to information, and participation aspect. And that is just coming to a close in 2020 of an 8-year work program, and will be under review at the moment. And the expectation is that there will be a new decision at COP26 when we meet again, hopefully in person in Glasgow in November next year. And this is an important element of the international process, is that there are things like the Paris Agreement. So there's a lot of discussions and negotiation that go into developing an international treaty of that sort. But then there are also working elements of the multilateral process, and the Doha Work Program, as it's known, is one of those sort of working programs, and it has an important role in bringing together the international and the national and the local, and this comes back to the issue of this being a systems issue that needs systems change, and that doesn't happen only at one level or with only one type of stakeholder. So we have to have governments, we have to have businesses, we also need civil society to be engaging in this, and education is a key element of all of that. But also I would just flag here that it's, and I think Peter alluded to this around the Western approach to education. This is a systems issue that also would benefit greatly from a diversity of the way in which we educate, and so Indigenous and traditional knowledge has not been at the forefront of thinking around this. And in fact, we know from real life that this is, in fact, we're missing an opportunity here, and we're also depriving Indigenous peoples of the right to educate. Goes with their values, and we're missing, but we're also missing an opportunity. I know of an example of the Sami people in the Arctic who have found, and the scientists who are working in a institute up there, who have found a way to come together and look at the way in which what their learning is and what their knowledge is can contribute to the science that is being undertaken in the institute. So when we're talking about education here, I think it's also really important for us to be thinking about this in the broadest context, and also thinking about who is being educated and how. So another example of this would be that I'm aware of a number of projects around the world where the focus has been about practical training on the installation and maintenance of renewable energy, for instance, in situations in which particularly women have not actually gone through a formal education process, but are still in a position to be trained and contribute to what Angie was speaking of, this energy transition. It will also not necessarily only happen as a result of formal education that comes through these institutions. And it's important for us to sort of think more broadly about how we educate. And I was very pleased to hear Peter's comment about the need for us to also be thinking about economics and finance and other aspects and social sciences in terms of what this means to think about and to act on climate change in a comprehensive way.
Thank you very much, Fleur. Now you opened up a whole lot of topics on that. Let perhaps just start a little bit with Peter. I mean, one thing that people often discuss in the context of climate change is that it's a wicked problem because it's globally shared and the effects are time delayed, right? So, you know, or alternatively, people said, you know, if a region or a country like Germany could determine its own climate, they probably would have changed yesterday dramatically. Now, you studied a lot, you know, organizations, how to motivate people, how to drive systemic change. You know, we have the Academy for Systemic Change. So how do you drive systemic change in such a situation? What would you give, you know, both to tell governments or to these people for Fridays of Future? What should they do? We can't hear you. Is there any? Now we can hear you.
One way you start thinking about this is, you look at kind of the institutional ecosystem. Many ways I started working with businesses long ago for this simple reason. You know, business is in some ways the most obvious, predominant global institution. So you really start thinking that, well, if you could really establish some different mindsets and ways of understanding in different key industries and a critical mass of appreciation of the short term and the long term being connected, I mean, you know very well what those challenges are like. And you could really get some significant change at that level. I feel similarly about education. I believe even though it's organized very differently and it looks like, you know, it's very idiosyncratic to different settings. As I was saying before, I think the industrial age education system is the industrial age education system. It's the flip side of what Fleur is saying. Basically, by kind of exporting this as part of global colonialization, which is really where it all started, we basically pushed aside all the inherited education systems that the Chinese had, that the Indians had, that Native peoples had. I mean, because education is not a new institution, right? All societies have to find ways to educate their children. But today, it's more or less a similar system around the world, structured in very similar ways. So the first lens that I would say you take is institutional. You look at what are the institutions that really have global reach? And what would it be like to start to kind of infiltrate those institutions with some different fundamental ideas and practices? Now, when you look at it that way, government is really a problem because it does not have global reach. Obviously, the UN has kind of been grown up to step into that extraordinary void, but we have no global governance system that has the teeth needed, obviously. And the nation state system is also not based on the laws of physics, but convention. Keep in mind, it wasn't until after World War II that China finally recognized that it had to be part of the nation state system because its inherited view of itself as a society or a nation was concentric rings. There was no ultimate outer boundary. Wherever the capital was, which has moved around a lot in 3,000 years, was the inner ring. And then there were rings around that and rings around that. And then you had the Tibetan Autonomous Zone, which is traditionally what it was called. So I'm just using this to illustrate. We have a real problem with the fact that governments, you know, you can't really be critical of a national government for putting the interests of its its people as the top. But it's not about the well-being of the Germans or the Americans, right? It's about the well-being of humans and all the other species we impact. So I think that's the first set of line of inquiry. Start looking at the different institutional realities and asking, you know, how do you kind of, again, infiltrate in different ways those? And that's why I think business is so important. And I think education is so important because they are the two most global dominant institutions.
Thanks a lot. I actually am personally grateful. As you might know, I focused a lot on changing Boston Consulting Group because I thought they had a global reach, and the World Economic Forum that trusts the same for business. So one is focus on the businesses. Perhaps turning to Antje. Obviously, MIT is primarily seen as a technology powerhouse, although you obviously represent all kinds of different sciences and so on. So there's always this, on the education side, this dichotomy to say, these technology things, and US also in particular always thinks, technology is going to get us out of there. We got it in there, now we have lots of, and fusion will save us. And there is this distrust from some international organizations. Well, it won't be that easy. And frankly, we have lots of the technologies we need. It's a societal thing. How do you deal with that in your education program? Because obviously you stand for technology, but to address also the the things, look, technology is not the primary thing that's going to get us out of here.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I grapple with that a lot because Peter and I actually agree that the mental model and the social sciences that underpin everything are more important, equally important, if not more important than the technologies. And you're right, we have a lot of technology at our fingertips. MIT's technology and innovation strengths is in tweaking that technology, right? So let's say we have solar power already available. At MIT, we make it better, right? But what we do in our education programs is actually introducing to the students who are mechanical engineers or chemical engineers or material scientists. We ask them to think about why is it important what they're doing? How would their technology be applied? How would they solve one of those grand challenges by applying the technology that they're studying? What social implications would those technologies potentially have? So our approach to education is actually really interdisciplinary, or I would even say transdisciplinary, in that we ask them to think about all those dimensions, plus also then think about the solution. And how we do this in the online education is by saying, we can't just teach them what we do at MIT or what is being done in the United States. We have to have examples and opportunities for these global students to apply the core fundamental knowledge and questions that they learn about in the course to their own situation. Because technologies that are meaningful vary across the geographic regions, right? So not everyone will have a nuclear power plant. Not everyone will have a fusion power plant. Not everyone has perfect solar or wind conditions. And so teaching this global audience of students how to analyze the situation that they are in, both in terms of the resources that they have available at their fingertips, as well as the social and political situation that they're in, and then come up with a solution that is the best solution for their geographic setting. That's really what our goal is. And we're hoping that that will lead to the leapfrogging of a lot of the problems that we see right now.
Very cool. And frankly, MIT obviously is one of those institutions that, while being located in Boston, has a global reach, right, in these things, in particular now with the online education. Now, Fleur, back to you. You mentioned COVID-19. And I think it has two interesting aspects. One is that obviously people realize that, you might not need to fly. You can do all kinds of things. Things can be very effective in lots of other ways. And we can sustain much more drastic change and do business under conditions we have never imagined possible. And the other thing, as you said, is governments are flooding the market with money, and they can decide how to do that. We in Germany obviously have the fact that the car industry is up in arms, that they didn't do the same as they did on the financial crisis, just subsidize people buying cars, but they look, we subsidize electric cars. And they say, but we are much more efficient and it's a best solution. And they look, but we are looking in the future. In the future, we need something different. What is your view on, so to say, how to use COVID, right? Because the world had a crisis, it knows how to spend, and what is potentially the UNFCCC doing so that governments, like Europe, that put it in the very forefront. We invest, but we invest if it helps. They have both, obviously digitalization and climate change as the two big topics. What are you doing? What are you seeing? What can people do?
That's a really big question, but
you're the United Nations, right? You're there to solve the big questions.
But part of it is really at a very high political level. So our executive secretary, Patricia Espinosa, and our deputy executive secretary are speaking in many places, and yes, it sometimes feels like there's a lot of talking going on, but at the moment it's important to be raising awareness and to be flagging this in the context of what's happening under the UNFCCC process, because as I said, this year is a very important year. Part of this is raising awareness and also creating, what the executive secretary refers to as inclusive multilateralism. Part of the power of multilateralism, when it does work, is that it creates peer-to-peer support for governments. And yes, governments are on their own in many ways, but in climate change, as with COVID, there is also a recognition globally, for the most part, that this requires an international response. That governments will be better able to support their own citizens if they are also participating in an international process. And so this is also part of what it's communication on our part to make those links between and to reinforce the fact that this year is such an important year, and that governments can't, or we are urging governments not to be, and the Secretary General is also communicating on this quite strongly, that we can't be separating out the sort of COVID recovery from the and from the climate responses, and it's an opportunity for governments who haven't previously thought about social protection systems or health systems to be in their nationally determined contributions, for instance. This is an opportunity for that rethink on what their priority areas are, that they not necessarily only in energy or in transportation or agriculture, but that climate change also has an impact and has a strong link to health. So it's a sort of multi-pronged approach in terms of continuing on the work programs that we have, but then also making these links that may not otherwise have been thought about or are not being stressed enough within a national context, and also creating the forums within which governments can also exchange their views and experiences.
Are you actually, can I follow up, are you driving towards concrete commitments on these things?
Well, that's what the nationally determined contributions are. That is what that's what the Paris Agreement was all about. Is these are nationally determined, but the whole point of this process is that they are peer reviewed through a global stocktake mechanism, but also by the fact that they submit their NDCs to the UNFCCC. So these are national commitments. One of the things about the UNFCCC process, which is both frustrating and very powerful, is that decisions are made only by consensus. And so there is no voting possibility other than for procedural issues. And that means that, and part of the reason why nationally determined contributions are nationally determined is to create an environment in which countries are actually able to make commitments that they can and to build on those commitments over time. So it sometimes seems like the process doesn't have teeth, and it doesn't in a traditional sense, but it does have mechanisms that we hope, and we are seeing with the NDCs that have come in, at least some of those NDCs are more ambitious than the previous ones.
Thank you very much. Now, many people think we're entering the decisive decade, and climate change will be the dominant topic of this decade. Now, the good thing is, or the good or the bad thing, as you need, we actually start feeling the effects also rather strongly already. The wildfires being perhaps the most visible, but in lots and lots and lots of ways. Now, I go back to you, Peter, and we'll ask you something that you hate being asked, because I know what could be, so to say, what could be single measures, I won't say quick wins, to actually make a difference. I challenge you because I give you my own that I had once again. I always said the biggest difference, if I could choose a single action, is to get the US back as the leader in driving this internationally. I think the US has actually wasted 4 years, not so much internally. The regional internally it does a lot, but yes, it is not leading the global effort, and is perhaps the only potential country to do that. Just to tell you, but what would be some things that you can say, could accelerate this dramatically? Because we need to also simplify a bit, not just complexify, to get some action going. We're running out of time.
Well, there's somebody doing some work in our house, so I keep muting it. So
that's okay. I hope he's isolating it. He's isolating it, no, and installing some solar panels, I guess.
I have to say, this is the part of this Zoom universe we live in now that I most like. It kind of breaks down the barriers of our professional self over here and our personal self. It was one of the early Saturday Night Live, very popular evening show in the U.S. that the host was hosting it from his home. And his dog came in, and he said, "Get out of here!" And it was a precious moment, and maybe I'll use that to kind of respond to your question. I think the single most strategic development that we face is climate change has to become an emotionally salient issue. Mm-hmm. We have to feel it here, not just fear that wildfire over there, but we've long felt that from a leadership standpoint, you have the motivations of fear, which are very powerful, of course, but they're short term. You have to keep creating new sources of fear. Or you have the emotions of real aspiration, what we care deeply about. I've thought really for several years now, the single most important political development in the world is the youth climate change movement. Why? Because we have a biologically inherited sense of responsibility for children. It's beyond culture. It's certainly beyond institutions. People will race into a burning building to save someone else's child. They won't even think twice about it. It's in us at a very, very deep level. So when the children come forward and say, you got to do something, you're totally irresponsible, it resonates in a different way. Now, I'm not saying everything is perfect about the youth climate movement. I'd love to have more ability to work and kind of help them develop their own strategies. But I'm just saying that what it represents to me is an emotional pathway into this issue. It's exactly what the scientists cannot do. Having spent a lot of time around a lot of climate scientists, the frustration in communication is extreme. They cannot help people see what they feel is so critical. And more facts will not do it. You cannot overcome an emotional blockage through additional rational arguments. In fact, you often get the opposite. And that's why we see the polarization around the world. The more you try to convince people, the more you kind of evoke this sense of fear. And people say, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to deal with that fear. So I think the critical development for this decade, in the broadest sense, is the coherence and visibility of the youth climate movement to make this issue an emotionally salient issue.
Let me pick you up on that, because obviously I actually always thought the Nobel Prize Committee could have been a bit more courageous and say, look, I mean, Greta did it. Let's, the World Food Program is a fantastic program. They did so much for the world, but for the specific immediate challenge that we're facing, why are they so afraid? But turning to MIT, you are about education. You educate the youth, right? Obviously, you can't encourage them not to go to school, but you can say, if are you trying to reach those people to go into the streets? And if so, are you trying to give them a direction? And if so, which one? Because they're a bit turning to the state and saying, they say you grown-ups have to care. And obviously, while Greta herself has been very specific in her demands, the general movement is a bit unstructured, right? Have you programs directed at that to say, what can you do? What should they do? Antje?
Yeah, so the youth movement really gives me hope, because as Peter said earlier, it's really about the mental model. And I think the youth movement and the broad acceptance of it is an indication to me that the mental model in our teenagers or in our young people is changing. And I have the same frustration that you have, Peter, that is, I want to guide them towards not just protesting, but finding out what how to come to solutions themselves, right? And how to apply themselves to solutions. So I think what you're touching on, Peter, is two things. One is that this mental model is changing, but also education and business are the two most important change leaders, maybe, or people in those organizations can be the change agents. And I think the youth needs to figure out how they can become change agents that will change business and operation of businesses. So, for example, this is very controversial, I have to tell you this. Oil and gas industry has tens and tens of thousands of employees across the globe. So most of our students say we need to divest, right? But what is the consequence of that? It's huge unemployment of the people who actually work in the oil and gas industry, potentially catastrophic failure of our economies. So rather than saying, how can we should divest from oil and gas, the question really is, how can we change these huge companies? And the youth are the people who will have to do that, right? So from an educational point of view, what I want to do is help them identify how they can apply themselves to be change agents and change leaders and champions in that transformation, and how they can do it most effectively. So where is the biggest bang for the buck when they go and work and start their career? And the changing the changing mental models is the prerequisite for intent and courage, right?
Cool. Yeah, I mean, youth is actually, I myself get so many requests. I think youth is really looking to contribute. And Fleur, for turning to you, I won't let you off the hook, because beyond serving the UNFCCC, you're also Australian. Now, Australia is famous of being one of the country with the highest per person CO2 emission. At the same time, it's a really interesting continent, because it's a little bit in the death zone of climate change, if you think about what will really happen, I think. On the other hand, it has fantastic assets. It could probably, supply the entire world with hydrogen if it wanted to, right? I mean, just from, the abilities that it has in terms of doing it, but would have to transform dramatically. And it's watching the coral reef die, right? I mean, you don't have to be very sophisticated. You can see it every day. At the same time, you have the fires, and clearly you're always in the question, are you fighting, are you trying to manage climate change, or are you trying to prevent it? Because managing you can do locally, preventing you do globally. what would it take to get Australians, I'll get to these questions from the audience in a second, what would it take for us to give Australian youth a direction how they could contribute, right? I mean, they must be upset, right?
From I obviously am working for the UN, and I am not actually in Australia, but I can see we talk about the emotion of this, the possibility of animals like the koala bear being functionally extinct as a result of the fires. It has had an impact not only on the youth but on everyday, everybody really. But what seems to be missing is the systems thinking that's required to transition Australia from where it needs to be, from where it is to where it needs to be. And that also goes back to the question of what you do about oil and gas industry and all of those workers. There is actually the possibility of retraining people who are working in that industry into other industries, and that would be part of something that you would think about in terms of, and this also goes back to the longer term, in the immediate, the medium and the long term, everyone knows where they need to be by 2050. Everyone knows where they should be by 2030 to get to where they need to be by 2050. And what does that mean from a national context? When you look at Australia, where coal was cheap and was abundant, and it's not only that Australia also has some of the best wave energy in the world. It has the wind energy potential. It has solar. It has geothermal. So it has choices, but what it requires is also the courage to believe that the Australian population actually wants that change. And I think it's very difficult to tell that in the sort of short political cycles that are in the Australian politics. But I think I don't think it actually takes much to see that young people in Australia are painfully aware that Australia is incredibly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, and that it's their livelihoods that are being threatened by this in the longer term. And there will come a time when it will no longer be profitable to take gas out of the offshore gas through offshore gas pipelines. It will no longer be profitable or feasible or rational to be powering with coal, and that time is coming very quickly. So it's a question, I think, of, again, this comes back a little bit to education, and I think one of the things that certainly in my education in Australia that was missing was around civics and around participation in the political process. So I do think there are things that can be done, but I do think that individual action is important anyway. But these are systems issues that need systems change, and that requires us to work within the institutions we have, and that includes the political institutions we have. So yeah, I'm not sure that answered your question.
No, I think, thank you very much. I mean, also, I apologize for asking the question, and thank you for the courage of taking the question, which obviously is difficult in your position. But as we said, it's an emotional issue, right? You must have an emotional feeling about your home country, even if you're very far away at this particular point in time. Look, we wanted to take some questions from the audience, so I think you can actually blend them in. You can probably see them better than I can. But I think this is a question for Peter, right? what's the most important thing that I should teach my students about climate change? Now, it didn't specify what kind of students, but perhaps you can take it in a large session, and perhaps Antje can then second Peter, in that specific question.
Well, I saw the question when it popped up, and I think, to me, the response is on three levels. There are technical things, starting with some of the simplest technical things about climate dynamics that all students should understand. And I'm now speaking all students in the sense, I would say, from 5, 6, 7 years old on. There are social skills. And what I mean particularly about that is how we work together with people who are different than us. And there are personal. So just to illustrate the technical, and I mean technical now in the sense these are basically technical foundational understandings of climate dynamics that everybody should have. It's a bathtub in one sense, right? There was a study done about 20 years ago now by one of my colleagues at the Sloan School with graduate students in management schools who could not distinguish in a kind of a paper and pencil kind of test between the consequences of reducing emissions versus reducing carbon or greenhouse gas concentration. They simply didn't have the constructs in their head. They basically thought that if you could reduce emissions, then that solves the problem. But of course, that doesn't solve the problem at all. You have to start by reducing emissions so far that concentration starts to fall. It's a bathtub. So that's a simple example. There are things like that everybody should understand, and particularly the activists. I'm kind of taking here as the stimulus what I thought Angie said very well. How do we become effective climate activists? So the first is be well grounded in basic technical things. The multiple types of time delays. It's a sobering fact, but we all have to live with it. Actually starting to reverse the increase in global mean temperature will take many decades. It's not because we don't care. It's not because we don't try. If we tried really hard, it would take many decades. And that can be understood. That then leads right to the personal one. How do I learn to deal with my own frustration? How do I learn to deal with my own anger, particularly if I'm young? This is my future. And of course, we feel this message very strongly from the youth climate change movement. Well, of course, that's true. You have a legitimate right to be angry. Anger will not produce an adequate response to change. We have to kind of hold the anger, acknowledge that it's not crazy, and realize that it will very often lead to finger pointing. But, they always say, when you point your finger like this, 3 fingers are pointing back. So we're all part of this. So how to help young people kind of acknowledge, hold their anger, don't ignore it, don't pretend it's not there, but recognize that, no, we actually are all part of this. When I take my little gadget at night and plug it into the wall, I'm part of the climate change movement. I'm part of the climate change problem because in most parts of the US, we burn mostly coal to power my gadget. When I click on my clicker to change the channel, I'm part of the problem. So, and then lastly, the social. This is an extraordinary challenge to foster collaboration at all kinds of levels we cannot even imagine. And yet we're starting from a very low level. What I mean by that is culturally, we are not a very collaborative culture. That's obviously going to be different from every parts around all the different cultures. I'll speak as an American. I think if you had a collaboration capacity spectrum, we'd be right out there at one end. Probably the Australians will be out there with us. The countries that have a strong history of colonial occupation and success, we do it by kind of fiercely overcoming the harsh odds that nature stacked against us. On the other hand, that's not going to get us there. A bunch of individual actions will not get us there. We have to learn to work together across all kinds of boundaries. So I'm just sort of illustrating. I think we have here basically a natural curriculum for becoming effective change agents that ranges from the technical, the personal, and the social. I actually think MIT is a great place to work on that because, obviously the technical parts, but the part of MIT culture that's kept me there all these years is that the lab culture, as it was traditionally called at MIT, is actually people working together to solve complex problems. For the simple practical fact that working individually, you do not solve practical problems. You have to work together. So I think there's a kind of a transformation of education that kind of puts collaboration in pursuit of effective technical solutions at the center. So that's a long answer to your question. Hopefully the different elements are clear enough, but to what to teach our students. But collaboration in pursuit of technical solutions, to me, would be a simple summary.
Thanks very much, Peter. I think that was actually a very good list. I hope everyone took notes. Otherwise, I'm happy to circulate afterwards. And yeah, still something more to add from your side. You're obviously the educational.
I wanted to add 2 points to that, actually. And one is illustrated by something we're doing at MIT right now, and we're including climate change education into all the general institute requirements, which are called the GIRs. And so basically, if a student takes a chemistry class, the examples will be on climate change. If a student takes a humanities class, examples will be on climate change. And so we're in the process of doing that at MIT right now. But that can also go into K-12 education. And we just applied for a big NSF grant to help teachers do that, because that's the second component to it. It actually requires collaboration. And our K-12 teachers are not trained to do that. They teach their own disciplinary content. They don't have time. They don't have the pay. They don't get paid to then also, outside of class, collaborate with other teachers and say, if I teach this in English, will you use the same example to teach that in math and physics and chemistry?
Yeah.
So this collaborative aspect of climate change education is actually really, really important, I think.
Excellent. So I'd like to take one last question from the audience. Oh, that's a long one. Looking at the bigger picture, the industry is one of the largest polluter, mainly energy consumers, etc. Actually, that's partially true, but anyways. Often individuals feel the contribution to the topic is too little and it doesn't make a difference if they save energy by less or become vegetarians. How important is individual behavioral change, and how could individuals be guided to a more sustainable life? That is a long question. Let me try to answer. I think there are two aspects to it, if I may. One is, so to say, what can the individual do, and the other one, is that the core problem, or Peter, they organize, so to say, to put pressure on others, because individually you can't have that much thing. Anybody want to take a stab on that?
Well, I mean, yes.
It's a Peter question.
It's a Peter question, okay.
So, is it individual or collaborative? Yes. I mean, really, I have no integrity and very little credibility to be an effective fostering in collaboration if I'm not committed myself. We all know that.
Yeah.
So, we can take it down to a very small level, what makes a good team? Well, you've got to have people who are committed individually, and they have to learn how to work together. So I think that we often get trapped. This is actually, in my personal view, a bit of a Western problem. It is different in Western cultures and Eastern cultures. The tendency towards dichotomous either or framing of questions. In many ways, it's one of the kind of fundamental antitheses of systems thinking. You have to learn how to hold dilemmas, to hold dichotomies. Is it individual or collective? Yes.
Okay. That's okay. Fleur, I'll give you the words one last time because I then have to wrap up, but Fleur, please go ahead.
Sure, thank you. And I think that I can only add my thoughts to what Peter's just said, and that is that it's also about people coming to have a personal understanding, the power of a personal understanding of what climate change means, and that can come through individual action. But individual action in and of itself will never solve this issue. It is a systems issue, but what it will do is also create the potential pathways for political support. It will create changes in consumer behavior. It does create pressure in certain ways in which things, the agricultural system, for instance. And I think, as Peter said, there is no one answer to this problem. So we have to approach it from lots of different ways and through lots of different mechanisms.
I think these were perfect last words, and I would like to, thank you very much. It was a privilege to be a host of this panel. I also, find it wonderful that we have, a woman power of this panel. I know that, Fleur feels very strongly about these issues, and so I hope you felt well represented here. And I would like to, thank you very much. I hope the audience took a lot away of this. So I would like to wrap up the discussion and then hand over, say goodbye from my side, and hand over to Helmut Lotze, the president of the MIT Club of Germany, to give some future outlook of this program forward. So thank you very much. It was a wonderful discussion to have. Nice to have you. Okay, then exactly, Wolfgang. So we'll hand over to Wolfgang.
So I guess since we've had a little bit of problems getting Helmut on board, allow me to take over. Wolfgang Ungre. I'm part of the board, and obviously we work very much on trying to get the whole alumni association together. Today it's been a particular honor to have so much support from the US and from MIT in particular. So thank you so much again for inspiring us with your contributions and with your very valuable insights. Not only from MIT, of course, also from the UN. These are different dimensions, different institutions, but the focus and the effort is one together. One book I read not so long ago was The World Beyond Global Warming, a book that was deeply unsettling because it just showed the immense scale of complexity that we are trying to struggle with. And we are so segmented in different institutional silos, in national silos, in belief silos, in paradigms. And the huge, as was mentioned earlier, the huge challenge is really how can we create a connected approach as humanity? It's a very complex question, and we will try, at least with some more events, to shed some light on maybe approaches. And so, as I think I mentioned in the opening, we're planning to take up 3 more topics on this, on climate change and what we can do about it over the next months and year. So into 2021, we will hope to welcome you back with some more exciting topics. We will define these topics over the next weeks and months as we move on, and we very much hope that we can win you over, and also not only for your interest, but also ambassadors to spread the word, because the good thing about events on this online platform are that they're so open. We can actually have thousands of people joining us. The knowledge should carry widely, and if we can contribute to that, it would be a great honor and a great joy. So we thank you all for being here today. We look forward to what's coming, and a big thank you again to Peter Clement, who was so instrumental in getting this group together. So thank you, Peter, and thank you all for the speakers, of course, for taking the time and sharing yourself. And we wish you all stay safe, stay well, and stay hungry. Thank you. Bye-bye.